Hi, my name is Doug Carson. Today I want to tell you my story and talk about how my dad, who was a pilot in Vietnam and was shot down and killed when I was 4 years old, how that's influenced who I am today. I remember the last time I saw my dad. It was on a cold January day in Hays, Kansas. And we said goodbye to him because he was heading off. He was a pilot in the Air Force, and he was heading off to Vietnam for a month or for a year-long service of duty. So I was 3 years old at the time, and so I barely remember, but I do remember how cold it was, and we have pictures, and so I remember seeing him, but since I was so young, there's not a lot of other details that I remember of him. For the next year, we lived without Dad and kind of got used to that, but sent letters back and forth and the reel-to-reel tapes, and so we would stay in touch in that way. And so we have recordings of my dad's voice and letters, and so that was great. But in November of that year, kind of as he was actually secretly, at least unbeknownst to us, making plans to come home for Christmas to surprise us. He's about 11 months into his tour of duty in Vietnam, and he was a pilot, and he was flying all sorts of missions. He was lieutenant colonel while he was there. On November 16th of 1968, we got a visit from two Air Force officers that came to our house and told us that my dad was on a flight, on a mission. He was on a reconnaissance mission flying an O-1 Bird Dog, is a Cessna single-engine plane flying low over the trees on the reconnaissance mission. And radio contact with him was lost, and the remains and the wreckage of his plane or any evidence of that was never found. And so that was a huge shock. I was 4 at the time. Yeah, I was 4 years old at the time. And I didn't really know what that meant. I have an older brother and an older sister, and they knew my dad better, and it was much harder. My mom obviously understood the implications of that, and so for the next 4 to 6 years, we lived with hope that dad would come home. We never had any concrete evidence or information about what happened. We just knew that the radio contact was lost. And so we lived with this longing that he would come back, an expectation even that he would come home. But in 1972, when the prisoner of war list came out, my dad's name was not on that list. We were hoping that he would be found as a prisoner, because up to that point we just didn't know. His name was not on that list, and so our hopes were dashed a little bit. The reality of the situation that he was probably lost was sinking into us. We didn't give up praying, we didn't give up hoping, but we knew at that point that we probably would not see him again. The government changed his status from missing in action to presumed killed in action, without any confirmation. That's the status that they had changed it to. And so in 1974, we had a memorial service in our hometown at the time is Russell, Kansas, where we just remembered him and had a service. And that was a point in our life, in our family's life. And I was, how old would I have been at the time? I would have been about 10 years old. And where we just said, okay, it's time to move on. We can't live necessarily with realistic hope that he would come home. So we moved from Russell, Kansas to Manhattan, Kansas, and my grade school years in Manhattan, I loved it. Lived a normal life. My mom was so strong. My mom's been the biggest influence in my life, and she let us live a normal life. But my mom was steadfast in her faith, in her trust. We were surrounded by family, and so that was a huge influence and a comfort and security for us. But I remember growing up in those years, and I was fearful and insecure because of Dad being missing. I had questions about what would happen if I died, And those were questions that I didn't know the answer to. We went to church, so I knew the Sunday school answers about who Jesus was, and so that was important. So I think I asked Jesus into my life as a child probably over and over and over again at every opportunity, because I was never sure that it stuck. I would have dreams of my dad coming home, and I would go, I wonder what that would be like. I so wanted to know who he was, because I didn't know him very well. So I so wanted to know my dad. Those dreams of him coming home weren't answered, and the prayers that would come home weren't answered the way we had hoped. In 1976, my mom was remarried, and so we moved from Manhattan, Kansas, to Bertrand, Nebraska, adjusting to a new family, having a new dad. And it was hard for him, and it was hard for us too, because he was never going to fill the shoes that I had built in my mind into thinking my dad was. But my stepdad is a man of strong faith, and has been a huge influence in my life. And after that first year of adjustment, us trying to adjust to having a new father figure, and then him trying to figure out how to have a new family, life went on, and I loved my life in Nebraska. After my 7th grade year, so this is the first summer after my mom got remarried, I was at a church summer camp, and laying in my bunk in the tree house, bunkhouse, and hearing my counselor explain the verse Ephesians 2:8-9, which says, "For by grace you've been saved through faith, and this is not of yourselves; it's a gift of God. It's not a result of works, that no one should boast." And I remember him explaining what grace meant, and that it wasn't a relationship with God wasn't something that I earned by how good a life I lived, but it was something given to me by God. It was a free gift that I didn't merit or I didn't earn. And I remember understanding at that night that I had a relationship with him, and because of that I had the promise. There's a promise that goes with it that I had eternal life that Christ had given me. And so I remember going from that week and being 100% confident that if I died, if something happened to me, I'd spend eternity with God. I was confident in that. And so that was a significant part of the beginning of my walk with God, is just understanding that God had already done it all for me. Remember, I'm the youngest, so my older brother and sister, they're both married and have families of their own, but we are all together in Nebraska at the farm, and summers on the farm were awesome. We loved being together, and we were reminiscing, to be honest, about our life and just how God had been faithful to us throughout our life. And we talked about Dad, and we had sold some land that we had inherited from his side of the family, and reminiscing about a letter that my brother wrote to my dad, that was just so poignant. My brother's a journalist, and so he has a way with words, and it's just unbelievable. It brought me to tears. But it was during that visit that we got a call from the government, who then sent out 2 Air Force officers to our house in Nebraska on the farm, and telling us the news that they had identified my dad's remains 25 years after he had been missing. It's the first time we'd ever had any confirmation that about what had happened to him. And so the Vietnamese government had turned over remains in 1989 to the American government, and his remains were kept at the Central Identification Laboratory in Hawaii, where they were finally identified. And so that fall, in October of 1993, they flew us, our whole family, out to Washington, D.C., where my dad is now buried in Arlington National Cemetery, where they gave him, where we had a funeral service for him, a memorial service for him with full military honors, all the everything you can imagine, the flyover, the taps, the horse-drawn carriage with his casket on it. It was an unbelievable experience on a beautiful October fall day. And that was just a time of great closure for us, because in that time we reflected on not only Dad's life and his faith, and we were confident that he was already enjoying his forever life But we had given it was a time for us to give thanks and just to reflect on God's faithfulness to us as a family. Despite the uncertainties that we went through, and there was many, in any given moment, we didn't know what the future held. We didn't know what was going on, but God was with us in all that time. Our family verse became, I think it's in a couple different places, but the verse that says that God is a father to the fatherless and a defender of widows. And that we lived that out. We saw God provide for us. He cared for us. He loved us. And everybody in my family is walking with God. My brother, my sister, my brother-in-law, sister-in-law, and so it just made us grateful. It makes me grateful for the legacy of faith that's been passed down to me, the foundation of faith that's been built for me that I can build on, and it makes me want to pass down the same legacy to my children and grandchildren. Now, let me tell you one more story, because this is, and I'm going to go back to my senior year, the day of my high school graduation. It was a morning, and we were around the kitchen table at the farm, and my mom gave me 2 letters. One was from my grandpa, who died 6 years earlier, and my grandpa had been a huge support to us in those years when my dad was missing. And so that was a significant letter that I read. But then she gave me a letter written to me by my dad. He wrote it to me on my 4th birthday when he was in Vietnam. And in his letter, he was telling me why he couldn't be with me that day. Now think of that, on the day of my graduation, why he couldn't be with me. And he wrote it on my 4th birthday. And in that letter, he explained that sometimes sacrifices have to be made in order to enjoy and to secure the freedoms that we enjoy. And so he just said, and he expressed his love for me as a father would his son. And it is the most significant and probably my most treasured possession. Because even though I didn't know my dad well, I don't have a lot of memories of him, I have this letter, and it's right in front of me. And it tells the love of a father for his son. And his willingness to give his life for something greater than himself. So, God is good. He has given me a great life. He's given me purpose and confidence in everything that He's called me to do because of who He is and what He's done for me. That's my story.
This morning, went to work at normal time, and Colonel Underhill, our second man in line, left today to go down to one of the stations now. The man rang. We had a little problem there with one of the facts, so we went down to discuss the situation with him. And Colonel Masenko left yesterday to go to Hong Kong for R&R or leave. So guess who that leaves in charge? You know, it's just an awesome responsibility. Seriously, I hope that everything goes well until Colonel Underhill comes back tomorrow. But while they're out of the night, I'll get the intern of mine to the store. Things have not gone too well. From my standpoint in the business lately. It's not the fault of the people in the dance. Return to the States prior to January 15th should be permitted at home before Christmas to help Santa Claus. But I kind of doubt that would sell. I hope that this finds Ruth and Kathy over their hay fever, and that everyone else is still hale and hearty. And with that at the end, for tonight again, I'll say good night, and I hope to see you maybe a little bit sooner again next time. I enjoyed making this tape. Good night, everybody. I love you. Love you too. Bye.